We're just gonna barrel roll right into it this week, YouTube. Today we'll be talking about the second wave of feminism. Last time we discussed first wave feminism, the quote-unquote beginning of the women's rights movement, and the passage of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. So we're done here, right? Equality has been achieved and we can all go home? No. Have a seat and let me unlearn you a thing. Having the right to vote for any marginalized group is an important step towards equality, but that doesn't actually guarantee it. You can hand someone a microphone, but that doesn't mean that the microphone is turned on. Just as a constitutional amendment guaranteeing people the right to vote doesn't actually guarantee that right. The important thing to understand here is that yes, women won the vote, and it opened a door that previously hadn't existed for women. But complete and total societal changes don't happen overnight, and the fight for equality was far from over. Which brings us to the second wave. It's been 40 years since women won the vote, and in that time, a lot of shit has gone down. The Great Depression, the end of Prohibition, World War II, the beginning of nuclear warfare, and the beginning of the Cold War. In 1955, the African American Civil Rights Movement began, and just as we can't separate the women's suffrage movement from the abolition movement, neither can we separate second wave feminism from the civil rights movement. Or rather, movements. There were a lot of them going on at the time. In fact, this time period is best known for the political actions of marginalized groups, including but not limited to Blacks, Chicanos, LGBT, and, of course, women. And men and women were participating in all of these movements, and these movements were constantly overlapping because, hey, no one person belongs to just one identity. But we're here to talk about second wave. Second wave feminism is usually considered a delayed backlash against the return to domesticity after the end of World War II, when men came back from the war to reclaim the jobs that were currently being occupied by women. The movement began in the early 1960s and ended sometime in the mid to late 80s. Traditional narratives credit the beginning of this wave with the publication of Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique and the publication of the results of President Kennedy's Commission on the Status of Women. Friedan's book, briefly summarized, focuses on how and why women, specifically housewives, were unhappy and claimed that the source of this unhappiness was that they weren't expected or really allowed to pursue lives outside of their husbands and children, and that those who did try to have a life outside of the home usually experienced harassment and derision in the workplace and in broader social circles. Friedan points to a lot of different causes for this problem that has no name, the one standing out the most being advertising, Freud, sociology, women's education, and women's magazines. The President's Commission on the Status of Women, on the other hand, was led by Eleanor Roosevelt and focused on uncovering the truth behind women's experiences in the United States. It was, and I quote, a governmental commission charged with the responsibility for developing recommendations for overcoming discriminations within government and private employment on the basis of sex, and for developing recommendations for services which will enable women to continue with their role as wives and mothers while making a maximum contribution to the world around them. We're still positing women within their roles as only wives and mothers. But okay. It kind of makes sense considering one of the driving forces behind the commission was the warring ideologies about whether or not protective legislation for women workers was helping or harming them in pursuing careers and taking care of their families. Side note, something that quickly becomes clear within second wave feminism and something that we were beginning to see in the first wave is that creating one single feminist ideology was going to be impossible. Like I said, this period of time was seeing a lot of different groups organizing politically and advocating for legal and social rights and protections, and it wasn't uncommon for a person's identities to clash. Tensions between gender and race, sexuality, and class raised important questions about who feminism was really trying to help and what true feminist ideology looked like. Intersectionality. Some of the ways in which these tensions were addressed was in the creation of groups like the National Black Feminist Organization and Lavender Menace, the latter of which consisted of radical lesbian feminists who, fun fact, took their name from Betty Friedan, and who was one of many who worried that lesbian associations with feminism might hinder political changes because people wouldn't take them seriously if they were considered man-hating. Where have I heard that before? But despite the different tensions within these movements were occurring and intersecting all the time. And as a result, second wave feminism did have an agenda. Whereas first wave feminism focused primarily on legal barriers preventing women's access to the public sphere, second wave feminism focused on social and legal manifestations of inequality. It operated primarily on the idea that the personal is political, and focused primarily on women's rights in the workplace, sexuality, sexual identity, reproductive rights, and issues of gendered violence such as battering and rape. There were also a lot of movements to change the images of women represented within media and popular culture. Part of this attempt to change popular representations of women was the protesting of the Miss America pageant in 1968, where women held up signs that said, "Welcome to the Miss America cattle auction," and "Can makeup cover up the wounds of our oppression?" Fun fact, here's where we get the popular misconception of feminists as bra burners, which didn't happen, but there you go. However, changing cultural perceptions of women didn't just involve protesting beauty pageants. For example, that same year, Shirley Chisholm was the first black woman elected to Congress. In 1972, Gloria Steinem founded Miss Magazine, which was one of the first magazines for women controlled by women, and the first women's studies program opened up at San Diego State. And in 1974, Elaine Noble was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives, making her the first openly gay candidate of either gender elected to serve in the state legislature. However, one of the most important outcomes of second wave feminism was the legislation. There was a lot of legislation. There was the Equal Pay Act in 1963, which technically made gender discrimination wages illegal. The FDA approved the oral contraceptive pill. Title X passed, which guaranteed the right to health care and family planning. And Title IX passed, which meant that no person could be discriminated or excluded from any educational program receiving federal funding on the basis of sex. Holla at ya, Title IX. There was the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, and of course Roe v. Wade, which ensured women's access to legal and safe abortions, theoretically. However, the biggest one was probably the Equal Rights Amendment. Actually, there's no probably about it. The biggest one was the Equal Rights Amendment, which stated that equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on the account of sex. If the vote was the rallying cry of the first wave of feminism, the Equal Rights Amendment was the second wave's. Awesome, right? Well, not everyone agreed. Those who supported the protective workplace laws for women saw this amendment as an attack on the policies that originally started the controversy with the Commission on the Status of Women. In addition to these women, there were also other anti-ERA activists, most notably Phyllis Schlafly, who claimed that the Equal Rights Amendment meant that women wouldn't be able to be supported by their husbands, that women would be sent into combat, that abortion rights would be upheld, and that single-sex bathrooms would be eliminated. No. Not the bathrooms. So while the Equal Rights Amendment passed through both houses of Congress, it was sent to the states for ratification with a 7-year deadline. 38 states, a 3/4 majority, were needed to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. And by the time the deadline rolled around, we had 35. Yeah! Now, there are a lot of reasons for this, but it basically comes down to a rise in social conservatism. Yay. However, the defeat of the Equal Rights Amendment on June 30th, 1982 is usually considered the end of second wave feminism, despite the fact that it was reintroduced in Congress in July of 1982 and has been before every Congress since. So yeah, that was a crash course in second wave feminism. Hopefully you didn't wipe out. Next time we'll be diving into third wave feminism, so get your wetsuits on and your surfboards waxed, cause it's gonna be a big one.